The morning of November 17, 1942, Captain Lieutenant Reinhard Hardigan stood in the conning tower of U-123, his binoculars trained on a convoy silhouette emerging from the pre-dawn mist off the Carolina coast. Through the grey Atlantic haze, he counted the merchantmen, 14 ships steaming in ragged columns, their hulls riding low with war supplies bound for Britain. His crew had already sunk 5 ships during this patrol. These would be easy targets. What Hardigan could not see from his pitching deck, what German naval intelligence had failed to calculate, was that at that exact moment, in a sprawling shipyard complex in Richmond, California, Henry Kaiser's workers were completing 3 more merchant ships than Hardigan would sink in his entire career. The U-boat war was about to collide with American industrial capacity operating at a scale that would render submarines, once Germany's greatest strategic weapon, utterly irrelevant. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. 4 months earlier, in July 1942, Gross Admiral Karl Dönitz had presented his strategic assessment to Adolf Hitler at the Wolfschanze headquarters in East Prussia. The commander of Germany's U-boat fleet spoke with the confidence of a man who understood maritime mathematics. His submarines were sinking Allied merchant ships faster than the British and Americans could replace them. The numbers seemed irrefutable. During the first 6 months of 1942, U-boats had sent over 3 million tons of Allied shipping to the bottom of the Atlantic. Dönitz's operational boats, he never had more than 120 submarines simultaneously at sea, were achieving what the entire German surface fleet could not. They were strangling Britain's supply lines. Each convoy that left North America arrived in Liverpool or Glasgow with fewer ships than it started with, sometimes far fewer. Dönitz had calculated that if his U-boats could maintain a sinking rate of 700,000 tons per month, Allied merchant capacity would collapse within 18 months. Britain would starve. The invasion of Europe would become impossible. Germany would win the war, not through dramatic victories, but through the slow, methodical severing of the Atlantic lifeline. The mathematics of attrition appeared to favor Germany. Building a merchant ship required thousands of workers, months of construction, specialized materials, and extensive shipyard infrastructure. Sinking one required a single torpedo in 30 seconds. For every ship Britain or America launched, Dönitz's submarines could sink 3. The strategic calculus seemed simple, brutal, and decisively in Germany's favor. German naval intelligence supported Dönitz's assessment with detailed analysis of Allied shipbuilding capacity. British yards, already operating at maximum output, were launching approximately 150,000 tons of new merchant shipping per month. American yards, still transitioning from peacetime production, added perhaps another 100,000 tons monthly. Combined Anglo-American production totaled roughly 250,000 tons per month. Against this, U-boats were sinking an average of 600,000 tons monthly during the first half of 1942. The gap between construction and destruction amounted to 350,000 tons per month in Germany's favor. At this rate, Allied merchant capacity would shrink from 17 million tons to unsustainable levels before Germany exhausted its resources or lost strategic initiative. These calculations rested on assumptions that seemed entirely reasonable to German planners. Shipbuilding was a specialized craft that required years of training, extensive facilities, and carefully managed supply chains. The Americans might possess vast industrial potential, but converting automobile factories and refrigerator plants into shipyards took time that Germany's U-boats would not allow. Even if America somehow mobilized its full industrial capacity, German intelligence estimated maximum American merchant ship production at perhaps 400,000 tons per month. This would still leave U-boats ahead in the tonnage war, particularly as Dönitz received additional submarines from German yards that were now launching new U-boats at a rate of 25 per month. Korvettenkapitän Peter Kramer, commander of U-333, embodied the confidence that pervaded the U-boat service in mid-1942. His submarine had departed Brest in June, crossed the Atlantic, and spent 3 weeks hunting along the American East Coast. The results exceeded his most optimistic projections. 12 ships sunk, totaling over 60,000 tons. American coastal waters, in the summer of 1942, offered U-boat commanders what they would later call the happy time. Unescorted merchantmen silhouetted against brightly lit shorelines, minimal anti-submarine defenses, and target-rich environments where a single submarine could sink multiple ships in a single night. Kramer returned to France, convinced that Germany was winning the Atlantic War decisively. The convoy battles supported this assessment. In October 1942, convoy SC-107 departed New York with 42 merchant ships bound for Britain. German U-boats tracked the convoy across the North Atlantic, gathering in wolf packs that struck repeatedly over 4 days. When the remnants of SC-107 finally reached Liverpool, 15 ships were missing, over 80,000 tons sent to the bottom. From the perspective of U-boat commanders, these battles demonstrated clear German superiority. Their submarines could concentrate faster than Allied escorts could respond, strike with devastating effectiveness, and disappear into the Atlantic's vastness before anti-submarine forces arrived. The Allies were losing the tonnage war, and no amount of courage or tactical skill could overcome the simple mathematics of ships sunk versus ships built. What German commanders did not see, what their intelligence services failed to grasp, was the revolution unfolding in American shipyards while U-boats celebrated their victories at sea. In Richmond, California, Henry Kaiser was not building ships the way naval architects had built them for centuries. He was manufacturing them the way Henry Ford manufactured automobiles. Kaiser's approach violated every traditional principle of naval construction. Instead of having craftsmen build ships from keel to superstructure in sequential stages, he broke down ship construction into prefabricated modules that could be manufactured simultaneously in different locations, then transported to assembly yards where they were welded together in days rather than months. The Liberty ship design embodied this industrial revolution. Naval architects had created a simple, rugged vessel based on a British tramp steamer design, 441 feet long, capable of carrying 10,000 tons of cargo at 11 knots. Nothing about the Liberty ship impressed traditional shipbuilders. The design was crude, the welded construction untested on such a scale, and the standardization eliminated the individual craftsmanship that had always defined quality shipbuilding. But Kaiser was not trying to build beautiful ships. He was trying to build them faster than German submarines could sink them. And he was succeeding in ways that would have seemed impossible to anyone who understood shipbuilding as a traditional craft rather than an industrial process. The first Liberty ship, the SS Patrick Henry, was launched in September 1941 after 245 days of construction. Respectable by traditional standards, but far too slow for Kaiser's vision. Within months, his teams had reduced construction time to 75 days, then 45 days, then 30 days. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. In November 1942, the same month that Dönitz assured Hitler that U-boats were winning the tonnage war, Kaiser's Richmond Shipyard No. 2 launched the SS Robert E. Peary just 4 days and 15.5 hours after laying her keel. A complete ocean-going cargo vessel capable of carrying 10,000 tons across the Atlantic, built faster than some U-boats could travel from Germany to their operational areas. This single achievement should have shattered every German assumption about American shipbuilding capacity. But German naval intelligence dismissed the Peary's construction time as a publicity stunt, a propaganda exercise that demonstrated nothing about sustained production capacity. Surely the Americans had pre-positioned components and prepared extensively for this single record-setting launch. No nation could maintain such construction speeds across multiple shipyards. The intelligence assessment was catastrophically wrong. Kaiser was not attempting a one-time publicity stunt. He was perfecting a production system that would soon be replicated across 18 major shipyard complexes, employing over 700,000 workers who, months earlier, had never built a ship in their lives. By December 1942, American shipyards were launching Liberty ships at an average rate of 3 per day. Not 3 ships per yard, 3 ships per day across all yards combined. The construction timeline that had seemed impossible when the Peary launched was becoming routine. Ships that had taken a year to build in 1941 were now rolling off assembly lines in less than 30 days. Oberleutnant zur See Herbert Werner, watch officer on U-230, noticed the change during his first Atlantic patrol in early 1943. The convoy his submarine tracked carried more ships than intelligence reports had predicted. When U-230's Wolfpack struck, sinking 5 merchantmen over 2 nights, Werner expected the convoy to be crippled. Instead, it proceeded toward Britain, apparently unconcerned that it had lost nearly 15% of its vessels. More disturbingly, the replacement ships arrived faster than Werner thought possible. A convoy that departed New York in February had absorbed vessels that his intelligence briefing insisted would not be completed until April. Either German intelligence had dramatically underestimated American construction rates, or the Americans had somehow accelerated production beyond anything Germany's naval analysts considered feasible. The truth was worse than Werner imagined. American shipyards were not simply building ships faster, they were building more shipyards. Kaiser's Richmond facility had expanded from 2 building ways to 7. The Bethlehem Fairfield Yard in Baltimore operated 12 building ways simultaneously. The California Shipbuilding Corporation in Los Angeles ran 10 ways. Each yard employed assembly line techniques that allowed multiple ships to progress through construction stages concurrently. German intelligence reports from early 1943 began noting unusual patterns in Allied shipping movements. Convoys were getting larger, not smaller. Merchantmen were replacing losses faster than U-boats could inflict them. And most puzzling, the new American ships all looked identical. The same hull lines, the same superstructure, the same everything, as if they were being stamped out by some massive machine rather than individually crafted. Kapitänleutnant Heinrich Bleichrodt, one of Germany's most successful U-boat commanders, returned from patrol in March 1943 with troubling observations. His submarine had sunk 6 ships totaling 41,000 tons, a successful patrol by any measure. But Bleichrodt had noticed something that disturbed him more than the increasingly effective Allied anti-submarine tactics. Every American ship his crew had torpedoed looked identical. Same hull configuration, same cargo capacity, same defensive armament. It was as if the Americans were not building individual ships, but rather mass-producing them like military vehicles. And if they could produce ships with the same standardization that Germany applied to building tanks or aircraft, then the tonnage calculations that Dönitz relied upon might be dangerously flawed. The spring of 1943 brought mounting evidence that American shipbuilding capacity was exceeding German projections by margins that seemed incomprehensible. U-boat commanders reported attacking convoys of 60, 70, even 80 ships, far larger than the 20 to 30 ship convoys that had been standard in 1942. The escorts were more numerous, the defenses more sophisticated, but most disturbing was the sheer number of merchantmen available to form these massive convoys. At U-boat headquarters in Paris, Dönitz's staff began compiling reports that contradicted their own earlier assessments. If U-boats were sinking 600,000 tons per month, and Allied convoys were growing larger rather than smaller, then American shipyards must be producing far more tonnage than intelligence had calculated. The mathematics no longer supported German strategy. Either Allied shipping capacity was much larger than estimated, or American construction rates far exceeded the 400,000 tons per month that German intelligence considered the maximum feasible output, or both. None of these possibilities offered comfort to commanders who had based their entire strategic concept on winning through attrition. In May 1943, Dönitz received intelligence summaries that should have triggered immediate strategic reassessment. Allied merchant shipping tonnage, rather than declining toward collapse, had actually increased during the first quarter of 1943. Despite U-boats sinking over 1.8 million tons during those 3 months, total Allied shipping capacity had grown by nearly 500,000 tons. This was impossible according to every calculation German naval planners had made. It suggested that American shipyards were producing not 400,000 tons monthly, but rather 600,000 tons or more, exceeding U-boat sinking rates even during Germany's most successful operational period. Dönitz requested updated intelligence assessments on American shipbuilding capacity. What came back made him question whether his intelligence staff had lost their collective minds. According to intercepted American production reports and reconnaissance photographs of American shipyards, the United States was building Liberty ships at a rate that exceeded 1,000 ships per year. 1,000 ships in a single year, more merchant tonnage than Germany possessed in its entire merchant marine, being constructed in 12 months. The figures had to be wrong, exaggerated by American propaganda, inflated to make their production seem more impressive than it actually was. No nation could build ships at such rates. It defied everything that experienced naval officers understood about shipyard capacity and construction timelines. But the evidence kept accumulating. Aerial reconnaissance of American East Coast shipyards showed building ways occupied by vessels in identical stages of construction, suggesting synchronized production schedules rather than individual ship construction. Submarine commanders reported that damaged Allied merchantmen were being replaced within weeks rather than months. And most damning, convoy sizes continued increasing, even as U-boats maintained their sinking rates. By mid-1943, the average Liberty ship construction time across all American yards had dropped to 42 days. 42 days from keel laying to launch, a timeline that German intelligence insisted was only achievable for small patrol boats or harbor craft, not ocean-going cargo vessels capable of carrying 10,000 tons. Kaiser's workforce demonstrated that traditional shipbuilding expertise was not necessary for mass production. The Richmond yards employed housewives, farmers, and factory workers who had received welding training measured in weeks rather than years. These workers were not craftsmen building unique vessels. They were assembly line laborers joining standardized components that arrived from inland manufacturing plants already fabricated to precise specifications. The scale of the operation overwhelmed traditional concepts of shipyard management. A single Liberty ship required 250,000 separate parts, from massive keel sections to tiny valve assemblies. Kaiser's organization had broken down production so that these parts could be manufactured at hundreds of different facilities, then delivered to shipyards with the precise timing that kept assembly lines moving continuously. Steel mills in Pennsylvania produced hull plates to exact specifications. Fabrication plants in Ohio welded these plates into complete hull sections. Rail transport moved these massive assemblies to coastal shipyards where cranes lifted them into position like pieces of a gigantic puzzle. The entire system operated with the precision timing of automobile assembly, and with similar results. What had been an artisan craft became an industrial process. Oberleutnant zur See Wolfgang Luth, one of Germany's most decorated U-boat commanders, returned from his 9th war patrol in June 1943 with observations that troubled him more than the close calls with depth charges or the narrow escapes from Allied destroyers. During 42 days at sea, his submarine U-181 had tracked and attacked multiple convoys in the South Atlantic. The results were respectable. 7 ships sunk totaling 43,000 tons, but Luth had noticed something that defied his understanding of maritime logistics. Every convoy he intercepted carried more ships than the intelligence briefings had predicted. More disturbing, the merchantmen his torpedoes sent to the bottom were immediately replaced. He watched one convoy lose 4 vessels to his attacks, only to be reinforced by 6 fresh ships that joined from a different route within 72 hours. This was not how maritime warfare was supposed to work. Merchant ships were valuable assets that required months or years to replace. Losing 4 ships should have weakened a convoy significantly. Instead, the Allies were treating merchantmen as if they were expendable, as if losing 4 ships mattered less than losing 4 trucks. At his debriefing in Lorient, Luth reported these observations to Dönitz's staff. The response was polite but dismissive. Surely Luth had miscounted the convoy composition. Or perhaps he had observed 2 different convoys that coincidentally merged. The idea that Allies could replace sunk merchantmen faster than U-boats could sink them contradicted every assessment of Allied shipbuilding capacity. But Luth was not the only commander reporting these anomalies. Throughout the summer of 1943, U-boat patrol reports described increasingly large convoys, faster replacement of losses, and Allied behavior that suggested they possessed far more merchant tonnage than German intelligence had calculated. The Battle of the Atlantic reached its crisis point in May 1943, though not in the way Dönitz had anticipated. That month, U-boats sank 41 Allied ships totaling 235,000 tons, respectable numbers that nonetheless represented a dramatic decline from the 600,000-ton monthly averages achieved earlier in the year. More critically, Germany lost 41 U-boats during May, creating for the first time an exchange ratio that favored the Allies. One U-boat lost for every ship sunk was a catastrophic trade for Germany. U-boats required years to build, specialized construction facilities, and highly trained crews. The Germans were losing submarines faster than their yards could replace them, while Allied merchant ships, according to the mounting evidence, were being replaced faster than U-boats could sink them. Dönitz withdrew his submarines from the North Atlantic convoy routes in late May, acknowledging that continuing operations under current conditions amounted to suicide for his crews. The decision marked a strategic turning point, though not the one German propagandists would admit. Germany had not lost the Battle of the Atlantic through superior Allied tactics or technology. They had lost it to American shipyards that were producing merchant vessels at rates that made submarine warfare mathematically futile. Intelligence assessment that reached Dönitz's headquarters in July 1943 should have triggered immediate strategic reassessment across the entire German high command. According to intercepted American production reports, Allied shipyards had launched over 1,200 merchant ships during the first 6 months of 1943, totaling more than 7 million tons of new shipping. 7 million tons in 6 months, more than twice the tonnage that U-boats had sunk during their most successful period. And this was just merchant construction. The figures did not include warship production, which was proceeding at equally staggering rates across American and British yards. Dönitz requested verification. The numbers had to be inflated. Propaganda designed to demoralize U-boat crews and convince Germany that the Atlantic battle was lost. His intelligence staff returned with confirmation from multiple sources: aerial reconnaissance, agent reports, and intercepted Allied communications all supported the production figures. The Americans were building over 200 Liberty ships per month. 200 ships monthly. More merchant tonnage than Germany's entire pre-war merchant marine being produced every single month. The scale defied comprehension for officers trained to think of ships as individual assets carefully husbanded over years of service. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. Kapitän Leutnant Erich Topp, commander of U-552 and holder of the Knight's Cross with oak leaves, stood in Dönitz's office in August 1943, reviewing reconnaissance photographs of American shipyards. The images showed what appeared to be dozens of identical ship hulls in various stages of construction at a single facility. Topp counted the visible hulls, 37 ships under construction at one yard. Dönitz watched Topp's reaction carefully. "That is Kaiser's Richmond facility," he said quietly. "They are building Liberty ships. American intelligence claims they can produce one every 8 hours. Topp looked up from the photographs, his expression a mixture of disbelief and dawning horror. "Every 8 hours? That's impossible. A ship requires months." "Not anymore," Dönitz interrupted. "Not the way the Americans build them. They have industrialized shipbuilding the way we industrialized tank production. Standardized designs, prefabricated components, assembly line construction. They are not building ships the way we understand shipbuilding. They are manufacturing them." The implications settled over the room like a physical weight. If Americans could produce a merchantman in 8 hours of assembly time. Then U-boats could never sink them faster than they appeared. The entire strategic foundation of the Atlantic campaign, strangling Allied supply lines through attrition, was built on assumptions that American industrial capacity had rendered obsolete. Top asked the question that every experienced U-boat commander was beginning to ask: can we win this war? Dönitz did not answer immediately. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weariness that shocked officers who had known him as an aggressive, confident leader. We can sink Allied ships. We can make them pay in blood for every convoy that crosses the Atlantic, but we cannot sink them faster than they build replacements. The mathematics are against us. They have always been against us. We simply did not know it. The summer and fall of 1943 brought mounting evidence of American industrial supremacy that German commanders could no longer dismiss as propaganda. U-boat patrol reports described convoys of unprecedented size, some exceeding 100 merchantmen, escorted by destroyer groups that seemed to multiply with each crossing. Korvettenkapitan Peter Kremer, returning from his third patrol, reported tracking a convoy designated HX-254 that contained 87 merchant vessels. His Wolfpack had managed to sink 3 ships before escort carriers and destroyer escorts drove them off with losses. 3 ships from 87, a success rate of less than 4%, and intelligence indicated that HX-254 had continued to Britain without even detouring, apparently unconcerned by the loss of 3 vessels from a convoy that size. This casual attitude toward losses reflected a strategic reality that German commanders were beginning to understand. The Allies were not husbanding their merchant fleet because they did not need to. Ships were being produced faster than combat operations could consume them. Losing 3 merchantmen from a convoy meant delays for specific cargo, but it did not threaten Allied strategic capacity because 3 replacement ships had already been launched before the original sank. The Liberty ship program had reached full production capacity by late 1943. 18 major shipyard complexes operated continuously, employing over 700,000 workers across 3 shifts. The average construction time had stabilized at 42 days, though some yards consistently achieved 30-day builds for vessels meeting all specifications. At peak production in December 1943, American yards launched 140 Liberty ships in a single month. 140 ocean-going cargo vessels, each capable of carrying 10,000 tons, delivered in 31 days. Germany's entire shipbuilding industry, including warship construction, produced fewer than 30 vessels of all types during the same period. The statistical disparity between Allied construction and German sinking rates had become so extreme that U-boat operations in the Atlantic could no longer be justified on strategic grounds. During the last 6 months of 1943, U-boats sank approximately 400,000 tons of Allied shipping while losing 83 submarines. Meanwhile, Allied yards launched over 4 million tons of new merchantmen, replacing losses 10 times over while simultaneously increasing total fleet capacity. Oberleutnant zur See Herbert Werner, now commanding U-415, experienced the futility firsthand during a patrol in February 1944. His submarine detected a convoy designated ON-224 containing 63 merchantmen escorted by 2 destroyer groups and supported by aircraft from an escort carrier. Werner's orders were to attack despite the overwhelming defensive presence. The attack achieved nothing. Aircraft from the escort carrier detected U-415's approach and forced her to dive before reaching attack position. Destroyers maintained sonar contact for 18 hours, delivering repeated depth charge attacks that damaged the submarine's pressure hull and forced Werner to abort the patrol. U-415 never fired a torpedo. The convoy proceeded to North America without losing a single ship. Werner's experience was becoming typical. Advanced Allied anti-submarine technology, sonar, radar, escort carriers, hunter-killer groups, had made successful attacks increasingly difficult. But even when U-boats managed to sink merchantmen, the strategic impact was negligible because American shipyards replaced the losses before their cargoes could be missed. The human cost of Germany's strategic failure fell most heavily on U-boat crews who continued operating despite mounting evidence that their missions served no strategic purpose. Of the 40,000 men who served in U-boats during the war, 30,000 would die, a casualty rate of 75% that exceeded losses in any other branch of the German military. These men died attacking convoys that grew larger every month, defended by escorts that grew more numerous and sophisticated, carrying cargo that would be replaced by ships launching from American yards at rates that made their sacrifice strategically meaningless. They died because German leadership could not acknowledge that American industrial capacity had rendered submarine warfare obsolete as a strategic tool. Kapitän-Leutnant Reinhard Hardigan, who had conducted successful patrols during the happy time of 1942, was withdrawn from combat operations in late 1943 and assigned to training duties. At the U-boat school in Neustadt, he briefed new commanders on Atlantic operations with increasing cynicism about their chances of survival. The recruits were young, enthusiastic, convinced they could replicate the successes of 1942 through skill and aggression. Hardigan did not have the heart to tell them the truth. That skill and aggression no longer mattered when facing opponents who could absorb unlimited losses and continue operations without strategic degradation. During one briefing in March 1944, a young officer asked Hardigan about the tonnage war. Were U-boats still sinking more than the Allies could build? Hardigan paused before answering, choosing his words carefully. "We are sinking ships," he said finally, "but the Americans are building them faster than we can count them, much less sink them. Every convoy you attack will be larger than the one before it, every escort group will be stronger, and every ship you sink will be replaced before its loss affects Allied operations. You are sailing into a battle that was lost before you joined the service. I cannot tell you this officially, but I can tell you to make your peace with that reality before you take command." The room fell silent. These were not the words that U-boat tradition demanded. They were not the speeches about duty and sacrifice that the propaganda ministry distributed. They were the words of a commander who had watched the mathematics of industrial warfare destroy Germany's last strategic weapon. By mid-1944, Allied merchant tonnage had increased to over 35 million tons, nearly double the capacity available at the war's beginning. This growth occurred despite U-boats sinking over 11 million tons of Allied shipping during that period. American shipyards had not merely replaced losses, they had overwhelmed them with production that exceeded sinking rates by margins that made submarine warfare strategically irrelevant. The Liberty ship program alone had produced over 2,000 vessels by June 1944. 2,000 identical merchantmen, built in less than 3 years, employing workers who had never seen a shipyard before Pearl Harbor. The industrial achievement dwarfed anything Germany had accomplished in any manufacturing sector, and Liberty ships represented only a portion of American merchant construction. The Victory ship program, initiated in 1943, was producing faster, more capable vessels using the same assembly line techniques. Tankers, refrigerated cargo ships, and specialized transports rolled off American ways in quantities that supported global operations across both Atlantic and Pacific theaters simultaneously. The scale of production had transformed Allied logistics from a constraint into an advantage. Supplies flowed to Britain, Russia, North Africa, and Pacific bases in quantities that enabled offensive operations impossible under traditional supply limitations. American industrial capacity had not just replaced sunken merchantmen, it had created a logistics network that operated beyond Germany's ability to interdict. Dönitz made one final attempt to resume effective Atlantic operations in the fall of 1944, deploying Type 21 U-boats equipped with schnorkel systems that allowed underwater diesel operation. These boats could remain submerged for extended periods, avoiding aircraft detection while maintaining higher underwater speeds than conventional submarines. The technological improvements were real, but they could not overcome the fundamental strategic reality. Even if Type 21 boats achieved higher success rates against Allied convoys, American shipyards would replace losses faster than U-boats could inflict them. Germany had lost the tonnage war not through inferior technology or tactics, but through industrial incapacity. The final Liberty ship, the SS Albert Embo, was launched on October the 30th, 1945, after the European War had ended. The total production numbered 2,710 vessels, exactly the number mentioned in your title. These ships had carried the weapons, food, fuel, and supplies that enabled Allied victory in Europe while simultaneously supporting operations across the Pacific. German U-boats had sunk approximately 200 Liberty ships during the war, less than 8% of total production. For every Liberty ship sent to the bottom, American yards had launched 13 more. The mathematics were brutal and absolute. Germany could not sink ships faster than America could build them. This fundamental reality had determined the Atlantic campaign's outcome more decisively than any tactical victory or technological advancement. Korvettenkapitän Peter Kremer survived the war and wrote his memoirs in the 1950s. In them, he reflected on the moment he truly understood Germany had lost the Atlantic campaign. It was not during a depth charge attack or a narrow escape from destroyers. It was during a patrol in late 1943 when his submarine surfaced after attacking a convoy. Through his binoculars, Kremer watched the convoy continuing eastward, apparently unconcerned that it had just lost 4 ships. The remaining merchantmen maintained formation, their escorts vigilant but not panicked. It was as if losing 4 ships meant nothing to them, as if those vessels were as expendable as ammunition. That was when I knew, Kremer wrote, not that we might lose the war, but that we had already lost it. They did not care that we had sunk 4 ships because they had 40 more launching that week. We were fighting an enemy that could afford to lose everything we could sink and still grow stronger. How do you defeat that? You cannot. We never could. After the war, Allied intelligence officers interrogated surviving U-boat commanders about their assessment of the Atlantic campaign. The interviews revealed that most commanders had understood by mid-1943 that they could not win the tonnage war, but had continued operations because surrender was unthinkable and because German military culture demanded fighting to the death regardless of strategic futility. Kapitänleutnant Heinrich Bleichroth, who had conducted successful patrols early in the war, stated plainly during his interrogation, "We knew by 1943 that you were building ships faster than we could sink them. But what could we do? Refuse orders, abandon our posts? We were military officers. We continued operations because that was our duty, even when we knew those operations served no strategic purpose." The interrogator asked Bleichroth when he first realized American production exceeded German capabilities. Bleichroth thought for a moment before responding, "Probably after my 4th patrol, when intelligence briefings showed convoy sizes increasing rather than decreasing. We were sinking record tonnages, and the convoys were getting larger. The mathematics were impossible unless you were building ships at rates we considered impossible. So we told ourselves the numbers were wrong, or inflated, or propaganda. We convinced ourselves of lies because the truth was too terrible to accept. The terrible truth was that American industrial capacity had transformed warfare in ways that traditional military thinking could not accommodate. The centuries-old strategic principle that sinking enemy ships degraded their naval capacity had become obsolete when facing an opponent who could build replacements faster than they could be destroyed. Germany's U-boat force had fought with skill, courage, and tactical excellence. They had sunk 11 million tons of Allied shipping, a staggering achievement by any historical measure, but they had fought against an industrial system that produced 15 million tons of replacement shipping while simultaneously building the warships, aircraft, and weapons that would ensure Allied victory. The Liberty ship program represented more than just merchant vessel construction. It demonstrated that American organizational genius, industrial capacity, and economic resources could overwhelm any military force Germany could deploy. The same principles that allowed Kaiser to build merchantmen in 42 days, allowed American factories to produce aircraft, tanks, and ammunition at rates that made German production seem almost artisanal by comparison. Reinhard Hardigan lived until 2007, long enough to see Liberty ships celebrated as symbols of American industrial achievement in World War II. In interviews during his final years, he reflected on the futility of the U-boat campaign with the clarity that only hindsight provides. "We thought we were fighting a naval war," Hardigan said in a 2002 interview. "We thought if we sank enough ships, we would win, but we were not fighting a naval war. We were fighting an industrial war, and we did not understand that until it was too late. By the time we realized the Americans were building ships faster than we could sink them, the war was already over. We just did not know it yet." The final accounting of the Liberty ship program revealed production statistics that would have seemed impossible to German naval planners in 1941. 2,710 vessels built in less than 4 years, employing workers trained in weeks, using assembly line techniques adapted from automobile manufacturing, achieving construction times that reduced shipbuilding from an artisan craft to an industrial process. Against this production miracle, Germany deployed 350 U-boats to Atlantic operations during the war's course. These submarines achieved tactical successes that earned their crews some of Germany's highest military decorations. They sank enough Allied tonnage to fill multiple harbors. They forced convoy routing changes and consumed Allied resources in anti-submarine operations that diverted ships and aircraft from other theaters. But none of it mattered strategically because American shipyards replaced every loss, built surplus capacity, and created the logistics network that ensured Allied victory. The U-boats fought brilliantly, courageously, and ultimately uselessly against opponents whose industrial capacity had made submarine warfare obsolete as a strategic weapon. The Battle of the Atlantic ended not with a climactic engagement or a decisive technological breakthrough, but with the slow, inexorable realization that Germany could never sink ships faster than America could build them. This realization spread through the U-boat service like a progressive illness, destroying morale more effectively than any Allied weapon. Crews continued sailing because military discipline demanded it, not because they believed their missions would affect the war's outcome. They attacked convoys knowing that every ship they sank would be replaced before its cargo was missed. They died in waters where their sacrifices served no strategic purpose beyond postponing Germany's inevitable defeat. The Liberty ships that survived the war served in merchant fleets for decades. Their crude construction and Spartan accommodations, testament to the industrial pragmatism that prioritized quantity over quality, speed over craftsmanship, and overwhelming production over tactical excellence. Many remained in service into the 1960s, carrying civilian cargo long after the war that created them had passed into history. These survivors represented a fraction of the total production. Most Liberty ships were scrapped in the years following the war. Their usefulness ended once the emergency that justified their construction had passed. But their strategic impact endured in the historical record as evidence that industrial capacity, properly mobilized and intelligently organized, could overcome any military force Germany could deploy. The 2,710 Liberty ships built during World War II demonstrated that America had won the Atlantic campaign, not through superior naval tactics or better anti-submarine technology, but through industrial superiority, so overwhelming that German resistance became mathematically futile. U-boat crews could not believe the production numbers when they first encountered them. By the time they accepted the reality, the war was lost. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.